Alright, I'm going to show you my progress in trying to draw something in SketchUp. So this is meant to be just kind of a watch as I do it and maybe learn some tricks and tips that could help you with your project. So here, let's get started. Alright, so here is my first attempt, and I just started kind of drawing freehand with an idea in mind. I did draw something on paper, and let's see if I can show you. This is what I have here. So I used some graph paper, so maybe you didn't have access to that resource, but I did, so I wanted to draw something somewhat to scale. So here I have some measurements, and the 22 millimeters is the diameter for the bearing that we're going to be using. So that's the outside diameter. So this is the hole that needs to be made to fit the bearing in it to make it spin. So 22 is an important measurement. And then the thickness of the walls is kind of up to you, but I do recommend at least 3 millimeters thickness with the plastic that we're using. That gives it a good strength. So this first one is 22, or 30 minus 22 is 8. So that means each of these walls is 4 millimeters thick. And then over here, this is the same 22 and then 28. So that is 3 millimeters on either side. So it's 6 millimeters larger, 3 on either side. So this one's 8 millimeters larger, so that means 4 thickness on all sides of the bearing. And then I looked online for just kind of a general measurement, because there's an important measurement between the center of the axis point where it's going to spin and the outside edge, because our hands are a specific size, so you can't make it too big or else it won't be able to spin in between your fingers. So basically the distance between when you put your index finger or your middle finger and your thumb together, whatever gap is left from here to here has to fit. This measurement has to fit in that gap. So I did a little bit of measuring and looking online, and 45 millimeters to about 48 is what I saw as normal. So 50 would be large, and anything smaller than 50 should work. Here I said this was 45, but then when I measured it out on paper, it actually ended up being like 55. I think I skipped 10. So in my drawing, I squeezed it down a little bit, and this is what I came up with. So I made one of these arms and then just made it a component and rotated it, like copied it and rotated it to make this is just a two-dimensional drawing. So it has no thickness to it yet. So this is our next goal, is to get to this point. And my goal for class today is for you to just observe my drawing process, and then once you observe that, tomorrow, then you can start drawing with some of these tips in mind. Alright, so first thing to get started, I wanted to have kind of a reference point, and there's a couple settings in here that I wanted to just let you know that are there, and they're somewhat helpful when you're drawing, especially small objects like this. SketchUp was kind of built for larger scale drawing, like houses and stuff. So when you get to small details, it's a little bit harder. And so I'm going to go ahead and start with a circle. It's going to be just kind of my drawing area. And I'm going to go ahead and draw, just click any random point. And I wanted to choose something on an axis. When you draw a circle, it doesn't really matter. But I'm going to go ahead and draw on the red axis, which I think is the X. I'm going to type in 200. 200 is our print area on the printer. So it's just kind of a reference point to see how large this is going to end up being. Alright, one of the other things that I wanted to show you in some of the settings were here in views. So views is found right here. And when you open it up, you don't have the option I just showed you. But if you click on this down arrow, you'll have this option, which is field of view. And this is kind of what has been confusing to some people. If you increase the field of view, it increases the kind of the perspective of what things look like when they're farther away. So in real life, when you're viewing something farther away, like a mountain or something like that, the mountain looks obviously smaller than it would if you were standing right in front of it. So this field of view gives you a more realistic view of things that are farther away, so it makes things farther away smaller. It scales them down, and then things that are closer to you look larger. So it's supposed to look more natural. But when we're working with small objects, that can be confusing because some things look just off. So I actually went in here and changed this value so that it was almost completely off. So here you can see that things look a lot different if they're farther away. If I turn it down to 1, everything looks about the same size, which it should. So this helps when you're drawing smaller objects. So that's one thing I wanted to show you. The other thing is another modifier key that we haven't used a lot in class. But if you hold the shift key down and then use your click wheel, which we normally use to orbit, that's a quick way to access the hand tool. So if you just click the click wheel without the shift key, you're in orbit mode. But if you need to shift the whole drawing over, you can hold the shift key down and use the click wheel and move your drawing around. It's a lot easier than going over here and switching tools to the hand tool and then doing this thing and then going back to the orbit. You can use this in the pan tool settings. I mean, if this setting is selected, it's always going to be the last tool. So if you don't mind switching between tools, like say you're in copy mode, yada yada, you're done copying and now you need to use the hand tool again, so you'd have to click on it to actually access it. If you use the shift and click scroll wheel option, you have access to that hand tool without going over here and clicking on it. So that can be a helpful shortcut. And modeling in this program is pretty much impossible without a mouse. So if you don't have a mouse, let me know. I can leave one outside the school for you to pick up, or go to Walmart and buy one, or send somebody over to buy one. We're not supposed to leave our home, so yeah. However you can get a mouse, basically get one. So here's my drawing surface, and this is going to help if you're making lines. You'll make sure that you're drawing on a surface so that you're not drawing out in space somewhere. So let's get started with drawing. First thing I'm going to do is draw a line, and this will be important. I'll explain why in a moment. So I'm trying to find the center, and this is the problem with SketchUp, is sometimes it's really hard to find the center point, which should be simple to find, but it's not. So what I'm going to do is create a line that ends at the center point. That's going to be much easier to find in the future. And another important tip is a lot of times you'll want to use the axis. That way everything aligns to a grid. So if you just willy-nilly create a line, you don't have a reference point for that. But if you draw it on an axis, it can be really helpful in the future. So I recommend when you're drawing reference lines to use an axis as a point of reference. I'll show you why that's important in a little bit. So I'm going to go just click here on the end point. This is my entire print area, so that's a lot longer of a line than I need, but I can just erase it later. So this is going to be the center of my fidget spinner. So I'm going to use a circle to represent the bearing dimensions. So when you're drawing a circle, you're putting in the radius, not the diameter. So the diameter was 22, and if I put 22 in, it would be a lot larger than it needs to be, because 22 would be too large for the radius. So you divide the radius in half. So for 22 it would be 11. So I'm going to do 1, 1. enter. So that's the area inside there for my bearing. That's going to be negative space when I print this out. And then I need to draw another circle that's going to represent the actual plastic exterior of this circle. So I wanted that to be a total of 30. So I'm going to divide that in half, so 15. Alright, so I've got that circle going on. And before I do any other drawing, I'm going to reference the second circle. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky. I said that when you're drawing, you want to make sure that the distance between the center of this bearing and the outside is no more than 50 maximum. 45 is ideal, but for this purpose, since I drew this 55, I didn't want to shrink the whole thing down, so I just went down to 48. Hopefully that'll be small enough. So I'm going to draw a line that's going to represent 48 millimeters away from the center point. So I need to just click to start my line and then type in 48, enter. Don't worry that your surface went away. Like if you need to redraw it, you can, but I'm going to try to just continue without that. That happens on occasion. I'm not sure why. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a right angle away from this line just so I can see where the end point is for that line. Just makes it easier to see. So this should be the outside edge of my fidget spinner. Nothing should be beyond that point. So I'm going to go ahead and create my second set of circles. I decided to, if you can see here, my design includes 3 bearings on the outside. So there's a total of 4 bearings, 1 in the center and then 3 on the outside. That will give it more weight on the outside and it will be able to spin faster. Actually, probably for a longer period of time. You don't necessarily need those, so if you just have a design that doesn't include bearings, you can actually be a lot more creative because there's not a lot of space taken up by bearings. So again, I'm using my holding the shift key down and using the click wheel to pan over again. Alright, so I want to draw some circles. I'm just going to draw them out in space because if I draw them here, these lines will start to divide up my circle and then it becomes hard to move. So I don't want to do that. I can't create my center point here because then this half of my circle will be outside the bounds. So I'm going to just create a circle. This represents this outside bearing. I'm just going to draw it anywhere, but I know the radius needs to be 11. And then the exterior of this is going to be a little bit smaller than the other, so I've got to find the center, which is right here. And this one was going to be 28 diameter, so that's 14 radius. So now I'm going to draw a line, and this will make sense why I do this in just a second. So I'm going to find the center, and then along the red axis, remember this line was drawn on the red axis, so this one is going to be drawn on the red axis too. Doesn't matter how long it is. And now I want to move these 2 circles, and I'm going to grab it from this point and then snap it to this point. So see, if I had drawn my line willy-nilly over here somewhere and then tried to move it from here over here, it would be off center. So part of it would be sticking out. So the reason I did this was on purpose, so that I can click here to move these and snap them here. Alright, so I'm going to click on the select tool, select my 2 circles. So you have to hold shift key down to add things to your selection. I'm going to select both of them, and then I'm going to use the move tool. Then I'm going to grab it right here. And don't worry about these extra lines, I'm just going to erase them later. And then click it here to the end point. I can start to clean up some of my drawing stuff. So I can get rid of this and this. Zoom in and get rid of this guy here. And I don't need this point anymore. And I'm going to get rid of that. I can get rid of this line here. And I'm going to leave this line here because the center of this is really important to find in the future. But these lines I don't really need anymore. Alright, so in my drawing, what I did is I decided that I wanted to make an arc from basically the top of this circle all the way over to the top of the other circle. It's kind of the outside arc here. So I'm going to draw that line next. So I'm going to use the arc tool, and the version of this tool that you want to use most likely is this one here. It's 2-point. So this is, you basically click where you want it to, like the starting point, the end point, and then actually before I do that, I'm going to draw some lines because I actually want this to snap directly to the top of both of these circles. So I'm going to click and start a line here and follow the green axis, which would be perpendicular or 90 degrees from the red axis, which would be this line here. So it's going to be straight up to the top. So I might need to zoom in so I can make sure I'm on the green axis. Click there. I'm going to make another line over here if I can. So I probably should have kept those lines in there. Sometimes you just got to keep moving around until you can find the center. Sometimes I found that if you're drawing on a face and you hold the shift key down, sometimes that will help you find it. Oh, there it is. That did help. I'm holding shift down and it helped me to find the center. I just released shift. Now I can click to start my line, and I went along the green axis up to the top on edge. Alright, now I have 2 points to snap to make my arc. So I'm going to click the arc tool, click here, and then this is where I'm basically trying to get this shape here. It's just one that I made up. It doesn't have to be exact. Let me undo that step. So from there to there, and just say about like right there. I want to orbit just to make sure I didn't accidentally draw this arc up in the air on accident. So there's one arc, and then my next arc is kind of freehand, so it gets narrower here from here to here, and then this area is a little bit wider. So I'm going to start the narrow part. I'm going to go a little bit narrow right here. So that's the starting point, and then I want to end about right here. And then let's just say I want to go like that. Alright, so I've got a basic shape, and this is pretty close to the idea that I had. But I'm going to just enhance this a little bit by making some arcs to smooth out these transitions. So I'm going to make an arc here, starting there and try to go there. Then I'm going to make another arc here. Maybe start here, there, something like that. And then I'm going to make one more over here if I can. Let's just go in. There we go. Alright, pretty simple. I'm going to go ahead and erase some of these lines that I don't want to get confused here. This is these interior lines. I'm going to erase all of these. Alright, so I have the basic shape that I want, and at this point it was important for me to try to see if I could duplicate this and rotate it to make sure that I like the design. So this right now is basically 1/3 of what I need to duplicate and rotate. I'm going to make this a component just so nothing gets removed or accidentally deleted. And I can always go back into this and edit it if I want to. So I'm going to right click and I'll just group it for now. And then what I'm going to do is do a little bit of rotating and then see what it looks like with all three arms together. So as a component, I want to make a copy first. And so to get into copy mode, you select the move tool and then click the control key once. You get that little plus symbol. Then I'm going to grab it right here. Doesn't really matter where I grab it. I'm just going to copy it. Then I'm going to make another copy because I eventually need 3 of these. Alright, so now rotating it. So I want to click the rotate tool and make sure that I click here on the center if it will allow me. So there's a couple lines there that are endpoints. Makes it easy to click. So I'm going to click here and make sure I'm on the green, actually the red axis. So I've been drawing on the red axis on purpose. So I'm making sure that I have a reference point. So I'm going to click here on the red axis. And if we're doing 3 arms, that would be 360 degrees divided by 3, which would be 120. So each of these needs to be rotated 120 degrees away from the previous one. So I'm just going to type in 120. So that's one arm. And then I need to rotate this one, if I was going in the same direction, 240 degrees. So I'm going to click here, and then same thing along the red axis. And I want to rotate it 240. Enter. Alright, so the last thing I need to do is put these together. So I'm going to use the move tool. I'm going to grab this one here. Make sure that it's grabbed in the right spot. And then you're going to click to place it. I'm going to move this one over, click here, and then click to place it. So now I have a good reference of what it's going to look like when I'm done, just as a 2-dimensional reference. So at this point, if I wasn't happy with anything, if it didn't look good all put together, then I could undo some steps, separate the pieces again, and then go back into this one. Select it, right click, and explode, so I can get back in and edit some of these lines if I didn't like them. You could redraw some of these arcs, what have you. So hopefully this is helpful, just the beginning of the drawing process in SketchUp. I know that it gets kind of confusing going from paper or an idea to actually drawing lines and arcs and circles and stuff like that. So plan out your drawing with the bearings in mind, the sizes that you have, because that's a known dimension. So these are 22 millimeters in diameter, and determine how many arms that you want, and do you want your arms to include a bearing or not, and then just start drawing your shapes. The important things that you learned today are using guidelines that will help you to snap things in place when you're done, specifically the center of circles. So you want to reference that by either drawing a line from the center point out, or again, we tried to use the shift key when we were drawing a line. So the shift key can sometimes help you find the center of a circle if you can't find it in any other means. And for some reason, drawing a line is somehow finds the center easier than trying to draw a circle based on the center. So when in doubt, grab this line tool, maybe hold the shift key down, and hopefully you'll find the center point. So some of the other things that we learned were the shift. If you hold shift down and the click wheel, you get this pan tool. And then also this setting here in the views, the field of view, that can help. So if I had this turned up too far, let's see what that would look like. Maybe that's way too far. Things just kind of look a little bit weird. So play around with the field of view. Maybe that's helpful to you, maybe it's not that important, but it did help me in drawing smaller objects to not have them look kind of weird in proportion to one another. Alright, so if you have a curvy design like this, you're going to have to just play around with different circles and arcs to get the shape that you want. If you're drawing with straight lines, it is a little bit easier, but the important thing is to kind of go into this project with an idea that will help guide you as you're drawing and have fun.